It's terror time. Subscribe now and hit that like button so you don't miss any story. I never believed in signs until I saw the cows form a perfect circle in the pasture, standing as still as statues of flesh and bone, their black eyes fixed on my house. It was my daughter, Sophie, who showed me. She, who almost never looks into my eyes, was pressed against the living room window, her delicate body tense as a copper wire, her fingers pressing the glass with a strength I didn't know she possessed. A rough whisper, a word she rarely used, escaped her lips. "Praying," she said, "they are praying." My name is Thomas, and my life was the farm in Yorkshire, a good and honest land I inherited from my father. My wife, Eleanor, was the balance of our home, practical and full of an energy that kept everything running. Our eldest son, Oliver, was 15 and was already beginning to shoulder the responsibility of the place, a quiet pride in his gaze. And Sophie, our youngest of 8 years, was our private universe, a planet of silence and delicate gestures orbiting around us, communicating through an inner world we struggled to understand. The first days were of strangeness, not fear. The chickens were the first. They stopped frantically pecking around the yard and lined up in the coop, one next to the other, forming impeccable rows like soldiers on parade. We found it curious, one of those inexplicable phenomena of nature, perhaps a magnetic storm, as Eleanor suggested with a nervous laugh. Oliver tried to disperse them, but they returned to their positions with a mechanical determination, their usual clucking replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. Then, the cows stopped giving milk. Their udders were empty, dry, though they continued to graze, or at least pretended to, until they stopped eating too. That's when I saw them on that Tuesday morning, organized not in a circle, but in a perfect hexagon in the farthest field. There wasn't a mud puddle, a dung heap, no imperfection to break that sinister geometric pattern. They did not move. They did not chew their cud. They just stood, all heads turned towards our house, towards us. The atmosphere on the property changed. The air, once heavy with heat and the smell of wet earth and life, became oppressive, charged with a silent expectation. The sounds of the farm, the soundtrack of my existence, were extinguished one by one, replaced by a deep, threatening silence, broken only by the wind that now sounded like a lament. The nights were the worst. The darkness was absolute, and I swore I could feel the weight of those countless animal eyes outside, watching the thin wooden walls, studying us. And Sophie was the only one who didn't seem afraid. On the contrary, she was drawn to that window. She spent hours there, no longer thrashing or whispering, but in absolute stillness, as if in a trance. Her hands, which had always fluttered or agitated, now rested calmly in her lap. One day, I thought she was drawing, her favorite activity. But what I saw on the paper wasn't her usual colorful scribbles. They were overlapping geometric shapes, hexagons inside circles, inside squares, all perfectly drawn with a precision she had never demonstrated. And in the center of it all, a deep spiral descending into the depths of the page. She looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, her eyes met mine with a terrifying clarity. She didn't need to say a word. The message was as clear as well water, and just as cold. It is coming. Eleanor started taking sleeping pills. Oliver walked around the house with his grandfather's shotgun, his teenage courage giving way to a pale terror that drained the color from his face. The farm was dying. The corn crop was wilting, not from lack of rain, but as if the very earth was being sucked dry, drained of its vital essence. The artesian well began to spit out muddy, salty water, with a smell of sulfur and old metal. The tension was a steel wire about to snap inside me. I had to do something. One afternoon, madness and impotence overcame me. I took the tractor, started the engine, and charged towards the hexagon of cows. I would disperse them, scare them, do anything to break that spell. But as I approached, no animal moved. Not a single ear even twitched. They remained in their perfect formation, and their eyes, those deep black eyes, turned to me. There was no fear in them. There was no recognition. There was only an ancient, impersonal intelligence, a silent judgment. And worse, there was an invitation. I stopped the tractor a few meters from them, my heart beating like a pneumatic hammer against my ribs. The quiet was more terrifying than any bellow, and I could feel, not hear, but feel a vibration coming from the ground, a low, constant buzz that rose through the tractor's wheels and into my bones, resonating with my own fear. And in this moment of pure terror, I turned to you listening, comfortable where you are, and I asked, have you ever stopped to feel the ground under your feet? Have you ever wondered what lies beneath the asphalt and concrete, in the dark, ancient silence of the earth? And if perhaps, just perhaps, something isn't paying attention to you too? I reversed. I turned off the tractor and went back to the house, feeling smaller than a grain of sand. The helplessness was a bitter taste in my mouth. That night, the vigil was broken. The frantic barking and then the abrupt silence of the dog Jack confirmed that the border between what was safe and what was a threat had been violated. In the morning, we found what was left of him near the fence. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle. Just his body, arranged in a strangely symmetrical way, his paws set at precise angles, like an insect preserved in a collection. His eyes were open, glazed, mirroring the gray sky above. It was enough for Eleanor. She started throwing things into a suitcase, her breath a whistle of panic. "We have to leave, Thomas. We have to go now," she screamed, not looking at me. Oliver helped her, his face a mask of terror. I knew she was right, but Sophie's eyes held me. She was at the window, as always, but now there was a tiny smile on her lips, a gleam of understanding in her eyes that was completely alien. She swayed gently back and forth, not as before, in a self-stimulating motion, but in a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if keeping time to music only she could hear. And then the ground shook. It wasn't a strong tremor, but it was deep, a convulsion that seemed to come from the center of the world. A muffled roar, like giant stones grinding in the bowels of the planet, rose through the earth and saturated the air. The windows of the house vibrated, and a picture fell from the wall, shattering the glass. Eleanor screamed. Oliver ran to her. I looked outside. The animals, all of them, cows, chickens, the pigs in their sty, even the birds that had silently landed in the field, had their heads bowed in a pose of total submission. It was a reverence, a collective, silent prayer to something that was stirring, rising from the depths. Sophie turned to us. Her small body seemed to radiate a strange energy. She walked to the center of the room and stretched her hand toward the wooden floor. Her mouth opened, and a voice came out, but it wasn't her voice. It was something deeper, older, a voice composed of thousands of whispers, of bleats, of moos, of clucks, the sound of all that flock echoing through her. "The earth will open," the voice said, without emotion, just a fact. "The shepherd is coming." The subterranean roar grew, became deafening. The roof beams groaned, and a fissure snaked up the living room wall, vomiting a jet of dust and that black, stinking earth. Eleanor collapsed, sobbing, pulling Oliver close to her. I could only look at my daughter, my beacon, my anchor in a world that was literally crumbling under our feet. She wasn't scared. She was complete. She was the messenger, and the message was arriving. And I understood, too late, that we were not being watched. We were being prepared. The cult wasn't about the animals. They were just the choir. The cult was for that which slept, and Sophie, my nonverbal Sophie, was its prophet. The ground under my feet moved again, and I knew it was the end of everything I knew, and the beginning of something for which not even nightmares could prepare me. The truth about my grandfather's scarecrows wasn't to scare away birds, but to keep something trapped, and I have just set that thing free. It all began last week, with the death of Grandfather Arthur. The house in Cornwall, inherited through generations, was now mine, along with a legacy I didn't understand and a field that had always watched me back. My childhood was permeated by that place, by the scarecrows my grandfather built with a solemn reverence, not for the corn or the wheat, which were never particularly good, but for something I couldn't name. My grandfather was a severe man, with calloused hands and eyes that had witnessed too much. He taught me many things, but never about the scarecrows. That was knowledge kept under lock and key, a ritual of which I only saw fragments. Every 5 or 6 years, a new scarecrow appeared in the field. It wasn't like the others, not made just of straw and old clothes. There was a ceremony in its construction. Specific objects were sewn into its interior: smooth black stones from the river, fragments of mirrors, geometric figures drawn on yellowed paper with a thick, red ink. The old scarecrow was never simply taken down. It was carried to the barn, where my grandfather, alone, would perform something he called a transfer. I remember the sound from the barn. It wasn't a sound of work. It was a low, constant whisper, like many voices singing in unison from a single point. I would hide behind the woodpiles, my heart pounding, trying to understand the murmurs that seemed to make the very wood of the barn tremble. The current scarecrow, the one in the field now, was the oldest I had ever seen. Its clothes were unrecognizable, tattered and black with soot and storm. The straw inside had rotted, leaving it with a cadaverous posture, a hollow, withered torso. The wide-brimmed hat hid whatever served as its head, but I swore that sometimes, at dusk, I saw a pale, yellow glow under the brim, like a single eye watching the house. The earth around it was sterile, black and parched, as if all life had been sucked from it. No birds flew near it. No insects dared cross that perimeter of death. The silence around that figure was absolute, heavy, a bubble of vacuum in a world full of sounds. With Grandfather Arthur's death, the responsibility fell to me, Oliver. My parents had left early, leaving me in my grandfather's care, and now I was the last of the line. It was then that Aunt Margaret came to visit, a woman with a hard expression and evasive eyes. She handed me a yellowed envelope that smelled of mothballs and thyme. My grandfather's handwriting was firm and angular, and the words I read turned my world into a nightmare. The letter detailed the ritual. It wasn't a tradition, it was an obligation. An entity, an ancestral parasite of the land, needed to be contained. It fed on the energy of the soil, on life, and if left loose, it would render the land sterile and then move on to the next source of nourishment, the family that inhabited the house. The scarecrows didn't ward it off, they trapped it. They were vessels, capsules of containment made of fear and superstition, and every generation, when the vessel weakened with decomposition, the entity needed to be transferred to a new one, a most dangerous process that demanded precision and an iron will. The letter ended with a warning. My grandfather's writing seemed shaky in the last lines. "The vessel is weak, Oliver. You must act before the full moon. It is almost free." I laughed. I laughed loud and alone in the silent living room. This was madness, the delusion of a superstitious old farmer. An entity, trapped in a scarecrow. It was absurd. I decided I would have no part in it. I would sell the property, go to London, start my life over away from that insanity. But in the days that followed, things began to happen. The old scarecrow seemed different. Its posture, once slouched, was now straighter, more attentive. The wind no longer swayed it. It remained immobile, a silent, malignant sentinel. One night, I woke up with an intense cold, even though it was summer. From my window, I could see. The scarecrow was no longer facing away from the house. It was turned towards me, and that yellow glow under the hat was now constant. Two luminous points fixed in the darkness, watching me, studying me. The air around the house became heavy, hard to breathe, laden with the smell of rotten earth and something metallic, like dried blood. The pressure was constant, a weight on my chest that wouldn't leave me. The plants near the house began to wilt, even when watered. A dog that sometimes passed by on the road stopped in front of the gate, the hair on its scruff standing on end, and howled for a long minute before running as if the devil were chasing it. And I began to hear things, whispers from the field, voices that didn't form words, just a hoarse, insistent croaking, as if the earth itself was trying to speak. It was then that I realized, not with my mind, but with a primal, visceral instinct, that it was real. Every fiber of my being screamed that that thing in the field was alive, and it was hungry, and the vessel holding it was falling apart. And I, in my urban arrogance, had refused to accept the truth. The night of the full moon arrived, a pale, giant disk in the sky, illuminating the field with a ghostly light. The Scarecrow looked like a living creature, dancing in silhouette against the silvery light, but it wasn't the wind moving it. It contorted, its wooden arms snapped, its form expanded and contracted as if breathing. The croaking of the subterranean voices was now an audible chorus, a chant of liberation. Fear paralyzed me. I was in the kitchen, holding my grandfather's letter, my hands shaking so much I could barely read. The instructions for the ritual were there, the materials, the words that needed to be spoken, a language from no place I knew. But I didn't move. A deep hatred for that tradition, for that curse that stole my grandfather's sanity and now threatened to steal mine, boiled inside me. I would not be the jailer. I would not perpetuate that cycle of fear. The decision wasn't heroic, it was desperate. I went out with an axe, not to build a new vessel, but to end the old one. The air outside was icy and still. The sound of the chant filled my ears, coming from all directions. That yellow glow under the Scarecrow's hat turned to me, and for the first time, I felt not just fear, but a vast and ancient intelligence observing me, a presence that saw my soul and found it insignificant. And I wonder now, in the silence that follows, have you ever felt something like that, a presence that didn't belong, a gaze on your back when no one was there? Was it just your nerves, or was it something more, something that noticed you were alone and vulnerable? I ignored the terror screaming at me to run. I advanced through the field, the dead earth crunchy under my feet. I raised the axe. The entity inside the Scarecrow seemed to understand my intention. The subterranean chant became a roar. The earth began to tremble slightly, and the Scarecrow rose to its full height, its rags fluttering not with the wind, but with an energy of its own. I screamed, a scream of defiance and pure dread, and swung the blow. The blade hit the rotten wooden post with a dull thud. It wasn't a clean strike. The wood splintered, and the Scarecrow collapsed in on itself, not like a pile of rags, but like a body fainting. An absolute silence fell over the world for a split second, and then it was released. It wasn't a physical thing I could see, not a demon of horns and smoke. It was a wave, an expansion of nothingness, of pure vacuum and malignant intent. It came out of the shattered Scarecrow like a silent explosion, a distortion in the air that propagated through everything. The wave hit me, and it was like being hit by a wind that didn't move a single blade of grass, a wind that came from the inside out, freezing my soul. The heat left the world. The moonlight seemed to extinguish itself. Every sound ceased, absorbed by that absence. And then I felt it, its mind vast, insane, and hungry, not for food, but for quiet, for sterility, for the end of everything that is alive and noisy. It didn't hate me, it simply noticed me, as I would notice a cricket chirping, an irritating sound to be silenced. The wave passed through me and continued, towards the house, towards the distant town. I fell to my knees, my will, my very thought crushed by that presence. The field around me changed. The dead grass turned to dust instantly. The wooden fence rotted and collapsed in a matter of seconds. The house, my house, began to wither, the paint peeling, the wood rotting, the tiles falling and disintegrating upon touching the ground. It was as if decades of decay happened in minutes. The entity was feeding, draining the life from everything around it, and it was free. I had set it free. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the end of the world in slow motion. And the worst of it all, in the back of my mind, beyond the terror, I could feel a single emotion coming from that thing, a deep, ancestral satisfaction. And then the whispers returned, but now they didn't come from the field. They came from inside me, a low, constant croaking, telling me I had been a good host, and that soon, very soon, it would be my turn to be emptied. The previous vessel was destroyed, but the entity always needed a new one, and it had already chosen its next. The problem with infinity is not its vastness, but what can crawl out of it. My name is Edward, and I opened a door to something that should not exist. It all began with a drought, a relentless dry spell that punished our property in Yorkshire for months. The old well was nearly dry, and water was rationed for us and the animals. The solution seemed simple, to drill a new well, deeper, on a spot my grandfather always swore held a powerful water table. He was wrong. There was no water down there, only emptiness and something more. I hired Mr. Walters, a local driller, a quiet and competent man. The drill began its work, plunging into the earth, layer after layer. On the afternoon of the third day, the sound of drilling changed. The muffled noise of the bit cutting through rock and soil gave way to a high-pitched hiss, followed by a dull thud, as if a large cavity had been opened. The machine fell silent abruptly. Mr. Walters climbed down from his post, his face pale under his cap. He said the drill had pierced the world, that there was no more resistance, only free fall. The machinery indicated an impossible depth, something that defied all geological logic. And then, the smell reached us. It was a heavy, sweet stench, the odor of rotting meat mixed with decaying flowers and a metallic note, like old blood and copper. A mist began to emanate from the opening, a thick, greenish smoke that did not dissipate in the wind, crawling along the ground like an animal, heavy, viscous. Mr. Walters approached, curious, and inhaled some of that vapor. He coughed, complained of a headache, and went home early. We never saw him again. We learned later that he was found 2 days later in his house, but I will not go into details about what was left of him. That first night, the mist spread across the field, a ghostly, stinking curtain. My wife, Isabella, a practical and courageous woman who always kept the family united, insisted we close all the windows, a premonition warning her. Our son, Peter, 12 years old, a curious and intelligent boy who loved observing insects and the small animals on the property, wanted to see it up close, but we forbade him. Our youngest, Amelia, only 6 years old, was frightened by the smell and cried until she fell asleep. The next morning revealed the first nightmare. The vegetation around the well was not dead, it was altered. The grass had grown anomalously, with thick, coarse leaves of an almost black green, and it moved slowly, as if trying to grab the air. The flowers had developed pulsating bulbs and released a pollen that glowed with a sickly phosphorescent light. But it was the insects that showed us the true face of the horror. Ants the size of rats, with irregular carapaces and disproportionate mandibles, marched in a line towards the house. A moth, the size of a sparrow, hit the kitchen window, its body swollen and hairy, its compound eyes gleaming with a malign intelligence. Peter, who was watching, screamed and recoiled, his world of innocent discoveries shattered in that instant. The ecosystem was turning against us, transformed by that abominable mist. The birds that inhaled it staggered in the air, their feathers falling out, replaced by bony spines, their songs turning into harsh, aggressive cries. A calf, exposed to the mist overnight, was found cowering behind the barn. Its skin was covered in pulsating tumors. Its eyes were black as ebony, with no white at all, and an extra row of teeth, sharp as needles, had erupted from its lower jaw. It did not low, it growled at us before running into the cornfield, now a dark and alien forest. The siege was closing in. The mist did not stop flowing from the well, a seemingly inexhaustible source of corruption. We realized we had to seal that opening to hell, but it meant venturing into the heart of enemy territory. Isabella, with a ferocious determination I had never seen, suggested we use the tractor to drag the concrete slab left over from the drilling over the hole. It was a desperate plan, the only thing we had. We put on thick clothes, covered our faces with wet cloth masks, a ridiculous barrier against what was in the air. Opening the door was like entering another world. The air was thick with the stench and the greenish mist, reducing visibility to a few meters. The sounds of the farm were a cacophony of croaks, growls, and whispers of dragging leaves. The plants tried to grab us, their stems coiling around our boots. Peter, bravely, carried a sledgehammer to break any branch that came too close. Amelia stayed behind, locked inside the house, and the image of her terrified little face at the window gave me strength to continue. Every step was torture. We heard something large moving in the cornfield, something that was no longer our calf. Shadows moved in the fog, distorted and impossible shapes. And it's funny, in a moment of calm between the surges of panic, your mind starts to wander, and you think about the fragile doors that separate your normal life from chaos, about the thin pane of glass that protects you from the darkness outside, and whether it is really strong enough, and whether you, right where you are, have never heard a strange noise from outside, a scratch on the woodwork, and convinced yourself it was just the wind. We got close to the well. The mist here was so dense it felt like a liquid, making it hard to breathe even through the wet cloths. The hole itself was just a blotch of absolute darkness in the earth, an open door to nothingness. The tractor was nearby, where Mr. Walters had left it. I climbed onto the machine, my hands shaking, as Isabella and Peter directed me, their eyes wide with terror, watching the fog that pulsed with threatening movements. The tractor engine roared, an incredibly normal sound in that nightmare. That's when the things attacked. They emerged from the mist, a blend of fused animals, parts of cow, of dog, of chicken, all amalgamated into a single mass of rabid flesh, teeth, and claws. They were the creatures, transformed and united by a single purpose, to protect the source of their transformation. Isabella screamed, grabbing a pitchfork she had brought and charging at the aberration approaching Peter. It was chaos. I maneuvered the tractor, sweating cold, trying to align the slab with the hole, while my family fought for their lives. I saw Peter striking a form that had been a dog with his sledgehammer, his face contorted in a mix of terror and rage. I saw Isabella, strong as a lioness, keeping another creature at bay. With a noise of metal scraping against earth, I managed to position the slab. I climbed down from the tractor, ran to help place it exactly right. We worked frantically, our hands slippery, the stench making us nauseous, the sounds of the fight all around us. Finally, with a superhuman effort, the slab covered the opening. The mist stopped gushing out immediately. The effect was not instant. The creatures did not dissolve, but they seemed disoriented, confused. The existing mist began, very slowly, to dissipate. We ran back to the house, leaving the field of horrors behind. We barricaded the door, and finally, for the first time in days, we could breathe, not clean air, but air that was not actively poisoning us. Now, days later, the immediate danger has passed. The mist is gone, but its consequences remain. The field is quiet, but wrong. The plants are still grotesque, though withered. Sometimes, we see things moving at the edge of the woods, shapes that are no longer natural. We sealed the well, but we did not heal the land. We opened a door to what we do not understand and closed it, but not before something got out. And at night, when the wind blows from the direction of the old well, we can still feel a trace of that sweet, rotten smell in the air, a reminder that infinity is right beneath our feet, waiting for another crack. And worse, whispers reach us, not through the air, but within our own minds, voices that are not our own, echoing from the well we should never have drilled.